If you protect those who harm Ron Paul, you are just as culpable as those doing the harm, and for far too long, I have been protecting Jesse Benton, but not anymore. I'm sorry, and I'm going to make it up. But if you love Ron Paul as I do, if you are as committed to the message of freedom as I am, if you understand as I do that Ron Paul is not just the best messenger that our movement for freedom has ever had and may ever see, and most certainly will see in our lifetimes, then what you're going to hear today might cause you some discomfort, might cause you a little pain and consternation, might cause you to question your own commitment. But if you stick with me, if you make it through this, I guarantee you that all of your doubts will be addressed. And if you come through this, if you will hear me out, you will emerge with me more committed to the message of freedom than you ever have been in your entire life, because the things that I have seen, the lessons that I have learned, have led me to live the life that I live today, and to strive continuously with everything I do to live up to Dr. Paul's standard and to live up to the ideals, the moral ideals of the message of freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Adam versus the Man podcast. Today is Wednesday, March 21st, 2012. We're going to be bringing you the headlines, what you can do about them, and as always, Adam versus the Man will be a show about empowerment. So today we've got the results from Illinois. If you're following the Republican horse race, that primary was last night. We've got some stories on Iran, the war that's already going on with Iran. A little bit of Israel's involvement, to put it mildly. We've got some quotes, choice quotes from Karzai in Afghanistan. Bernanke has been giving speeches, or actually gave the first in a series at George Washington. We'll have a review of that. We've got the latest shenanigans from the IRS, the Nassau County toilet tax. A man put in jail for citing violations, and some good news about sodas in America. Let me just say first, this show is entirely supported voluntarily and made possible by fans of Adam versus the Man. I'm so grateful for your support. Getting me to this point now of Adam versus the Man 4.0. I guess just really briefly, we can get into this in another episode, but really briefly, how I got to this point. I was in the Marines. I joined in 1999 in the delayed entry program. I was 17 years old, went to boot camp June 18, 2000. You never forget the day you step on the yellow footprints. And when I was in the reserves, I went to college, and 9/11 happened, and I volunteered to go to Fallujah, to Iraq, with a civil affairs team. I was there in 2004 for the first battle, not the second one, the big one. But it was enough. It was enough. I got my slice of combat, and I came home and went back to school, started getting disillusioned, got in trouble for bringing a pistol back, so I spent a year at Camp Pendleton as a sergeant with civil affairs experience who spoke Arabic, mowing lawns, managing a barracks, and was just disgruntled enough when I left to really start questioning things. And when I came across the website for Iraq Veterans Against the War, well, I knew I just wanted to be a part of it. And so I joined, and that got me started really in politics like I hadn't been involved before. I was actually president of the Claremont College's Libertarians Club for a short period, but the transformation for me from going to Iraq and coming home was going from issues, intellectual libertarianism, to philosophical, spiritual libertarianism. And so I ran for Congress. I was endorsed by Ron Paul in 2010, lost with just under 40% or so of the vote in the primary after getting stabbed in the back by the establishment pretty badly. Unsurprisingly, my responsibility entirely, of course, for strategic mistakes, but that will certainly have to wait for another episode. So after the run for Congress, well, I was just one of those candidates that couldn't shut up when the race was over. So I got a radio show, and part of the deal with the local station, AM 1550 KIVA out of Albuquerque, was that I was supposed to sell my own ads. And I freaking hate selling ads. I hate selling anything. I hate selling myself. Except I love selling the message. So that's what I'm doing now. But anyways, my show was about to get canceled for lack of revenue when it was picked up as a television show by RT America. Yes, I am no longer a paid Russian propagandist media operative. I'm simply a Russian-trained media operative. But the TV show only lasted a few months, was canceled for political reasons. Another topic for an entirely different podcast. But anyways, after that was canceled, I decided that if I had gotten the same offer again, I would turn it down and I would go with this independent model. And I've been making YouTube videos for the past several months. I've been averaging more than one a day. And I want to just thank everybody who's made it possible for me over the last few months to be able to say I make YouTube videos for a living. But I have a pitch, and we're having a pledge drive, but we're going to save that for the end of the episode. Stick with me for the next 52 minutes, and if it's worth it, then you'll get to hear the pitch. So, for our top story, the Illinois primary was held last night. Unsurprisingly, the results, Romney with a decisive victory, 47%. Santorum, 35%. Ron Paul, 9%. Gingrich, 8%. And the Ron Paul supporters will have another reason to be angry at the prostitutes in the mainstream media for dismissing Paul. And at this point, like, I want to give them some credit because there are lots of reasons for them to dismiss Ron Paul, several of which are directly related to Jesse Benton. And like I said, I promise we'll get into that. But we should take heart, at least here, and that we can say Ron Paul beat out the other establishment candidate, Newt Gingrich, if only by 1%. But the real story here is that the turnout was the lowest in 70 years. 70 years. 15% turnout. Now, this is something really, as libertarians, as philosophical libertarians, I think we can take heart from. The less people turn out to vote, supposedly, so the argument goes, the less credibility government has, the less sanction they have, the less moral imperative they can claim, the less they can claim to be speaking on behalf of the people. Although that rationale seems to have gone out the window a long time ago. I haven't really heard people making the argument that the government somehow represents the people today for quite a while. Because it seems like that's what half of the statist arguments are based on. But the government, it represents the will of the people. Well, in Illinois, at least for the primary here, it represents 15%. Now, and you might say, well, Ron Paul, you would hope that the turnout, if it was so low, that the hardcore Ron Paul supporters would be more than 9%. But I still take heart from this number. I think it's really encouraging that less people overall are coming out to vote between Romney, Santorum, and Gingrich. I think the people who are hardcore Ron Paul supporters are going to come out and vote anyways, regardless of their opinion of government. When you have a chance to nominate an anarcho-capitalist, a voluntarist, a philosophical libertarian like Ron Paul, you're going to come out regardless of what else is going on. And I know my friends in the Chicago area with the meetup there, Forrest doing all that great work, all Gary Franchi, Revolution PAC based out of there. You know, I know that they got their people out. I know that they did that part, and that 9% represented a lot of important votes. But this is a good trend. The less the sheeple are voting, the less credibility government has, the more, say, the freedom movement will have in elections in the future. At least that's my inner optimist speaking. But there was one other interesting thing to note from the Illinois results yesterday. Santorum's team had a conference call or something with some reporters, and there was just a great I'm sorry, I don't know the quote here, but there was a great quote from one of the media advisors on his team saying that what Romney delegates were pulling was something like they would pull in Iran. It's an interesting comparison. Not just because this is another attempt by Santorum to demonize Iran, playing on the ignorance of the American people. Now, in Missouri recently, there was a horribly botched caucus. I think it was in Charles County, the biggest county in the state of Missouri. And by the way, about this story, if you want to get the full story, Ben Swan in a radio interview did the best breakdown. He's going to be covering it for his Reality Check series. He's a reporter for a Fox affiliate in Ohio who does incredible work. And by incredible work, I should say, important truth-telling. So after this totally botched caucus, a guy who stood up and convened it properly in the parking lot of this high school ended up getting arrested. And no delegates were selected. I mean, this thing is totally useless. And Santorum is saying, well, and this is about Illinois, well, Romney delegates are pulling something that they would have pulled in Iran. How about what they would have pulled in Missouri? What the Republican Party establishment terrorists, political terrorists, and you know what? If you want to use a broad definition of terrorism, calling the police on someone for convening a proper Republican Party county delegate selection process meeting, I suppose by the definitions thrown around by most of our politicians, yeah, that's some kind of terrorism. Using force, threatening violence against someone acting peacefully, speaking out politically, putting them in a cage, and issuing them a citation for trespassing. Anyways, so it's nice to know that the Santorum campaign, similar to the Paul campaign, is experiencing some of the problems with the delegate process and enough to complain specifically about the Romney delegates. But that's all besides the point, and leads us to some more important stories having to do with Iran and what people actually in office are doing to spread the violence of the American government throughout the world. This story is titled, State Department Exempts 11 Countries from Iran Sanctions. Now, we're already at war with Iran. This is the big secret. This is the secret that's just out in the open that nobody wants to talk about. We are not working our way up to a war with Iran. We have been at war with Iran. If you are putting sanctions on a country and saying we will use the force of our military to stop certain people from trading with you, that's an act of war. It always has been. This idea that in the modern civilized world, we can put trade sanctions on people and it's somehow not an act of war all of a sudden, it's an act of diplomacy, is utter bullshit. This is ridiculous. But this really reveals the scam of sanctions in terms of the economic manipulation, the geopolitical manipulation, because it gives governments an incredible excuse to manipulate world trade. Here's a quote from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton from a statement yesterday. Quote, I am pleased to announce that an initial group of 11 countries has significantly reduced their volume of crude oil purchases from Iran, Belgium, the Czech Republic, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom. As a result, I will report to the Congress that sanctions pursuant to Section 1245 of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2012, NDAA, oh yeah, this was in there too, will not apply to the financial institutions based in these countries for a renewable period of 180 days. The actions taken by these countries were not easy. They had to rethink their energy needs at a critical time for the world economy and quickly begin to find alternatives to Iranian oil, which many had been relying on for their energy needs. Oh my God, I don't know where to fucking start with this one. It reminds me of Obamacare and the waivers. Obamacare. Everybody's going to get screwed unless you donate to the Obama re-election campaign and your corporation gets a nice waiver from Obamacare and you can opt out, or your state can opt out, or who knows what other backdoor deals have been going on here. But the sanctions, we're going to impose sanctions on Iran because they're a threat. That we have to threaten military force against people who would trade with Iran to stop them from doing other military harm, right? And this, of course, coming on the premise that they're working on a nuclear weapons program, and the United States government being the only one in the world that has actually used nuclear weapons should seem incredibly hypocritical to anybody with any sense of historical perspective in this issue. So, in the implications for this, obviously, the price of oil will be affected. In fact, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, came out in New Delhi, which she was on a speaking tour there or something, said that oil prices may spike by up to 30% if Iranian supplies were disrupted, causing, quote, serious consequences. Clearly, it would be a shock to economies if there was a major shortage of exports of oil out of Iran. It would certainly drive up prices for a period of time. Specifically, they said, could increase oil prices by 20 to 30%. Okay. And then this gets fed into all the conspiracy theories that actually have pretty good merit when it comes to the Obama regime strategy of driving up oil prices to better control the economy and manipulate money and resources towards the green economy, so on and so forth. All right. But more interestingly, leading up to the hot war, the real war that so many people are afraid of, that so many of us are working to stop, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is finally getting called out, and this is because of a speech he recently gave, no surprise, to AIPAC, the U.S.-Israeli lobbying group in D.C. earlier this month. He is now being called out for his frequent references to the Holocaust. And what is so fucking sick and twisted here, and offends me personally as a Jew. Yes, I'm Jewish. You couldn't tell from the nose? No? Okay. Well, when I grew my hair out, it was a 6-inch Jew fro, and that's not going to happen again. But back to the important stuff. Benjamin Netanyahu has been throwing around the Holocaust metaphor. And of course, this is an old trick. In fact, there's a quote here I want to share from this story from the Financial Times. According to Tom Segev, an Israeli historian and the author of a book about Israel and the Holocaust, the Nazi genocide has long had a profound effect on politics. Quote, the Holocaust is a very central element of the Israeli identity. There is not a single day without a reference to the Holocaust in the media, and there is not a single Arab leader who has not at some point been compared to Hitler. It is a very old cliche, end quote. So the criticisms here are threefold. First, that invoking the Holocaust so carelessly cheapens the memory of this singular historical event. That to invoke it out of context, to invoke it for trite reasons, to just the Holocaust, the Holocaust, the Holocaust is in and of itself disrespectful to the victims of the Holocaust. Second problem here is that it portrays is the word that this politically correct news story uses. Let me rephrase that. Netanyahu comparing the current situation with Israel and Iran to the Holocaust perpetuates this disgusting misrepresentation of the truth, this horrific lie that contemporary Israel is a helpless victim. And Iran is as the story says, crushingly powerful country that is bent on genocide. I'll bet they even have freer, fairer elections in Iran than they do in Israel or Missouri, or the rest of the United States on average for that matter. The final criticism, according to the story, is that this language is being used to heighten tensions, as it says, at a time when leaders outside Israel are still looking for a diplomatic solution to the standoff with Tehran. Quote, their concern is that any comparison with the Nazi genocide creates a moral imperative that may ultimately make an Israeli attack on Iran inevitable. People in Israel are referring to the remarks as infuriating, vulgar, and inane, according to Tzipi Livni, the leader of the opposition, calling on Netanyahu's government to stop with the, quote, hysterical comparisons. Yes, but it's not just that. This is the typical government lead up to war, and the Holocaust simply serves as the perfect propaganda tool. And if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, you can pull it out of your ass whenever you feel like it, and everybody's supposed to go, oh, the Holocaust. Let's do whatever Israel says. Let's let them do whatever they want. But you know what? There is no greater insult to the memory of the victims of the Holocaust than by using their memory to start another war. All right, which leads us to our next story. Another person who is, well, with Israel, it's hard to say who's the puppet. Is it the American foreign policy instrument, is Israel the 51st state, or was it Iraq? I guess that would make Iraq number 52. We go now to the 53rd state of the United States of America, Afghanistan, where, according to the New York Times, the gulf is widening between the United States and a more volatile Karzai. Now, let me just, as an aside here, point out the problems. Well, one problem of the rhetoric of mainstream journalism here. Gulf widens between U.S. and a more volatile Karzai. That's the headline for the New York Times. Do you see a problem with this? Can you hear the incongruity, the detachment from reality? The U.S. No. A more volatile Karzai is not distancing himself from the U.S. No, he's distancing himself from the American government. It's not our foreign policy, unless you want to buy that bullshit premise that the government in the United States is a fair representation of the will of the people. No, it is the government's foreign policy. It is the foreign policy designed to perpetuate the power of the government, serve the special interests, and funnel money and power away from the American people and to the friends of government. It's simple as that. Now, I won't bore you with that rant every time I see such language appear in mainstream media reports, because I could talk about nothing else, and that would be the only subject of this podcast every single day as long as there is a mainstream media. But or at least until the mainstream paradigm changes and gets away from this delusion that we are the government. But I point this out because I want to say that I've always relied on the support of listeners, on the support of viewers, on the support of fans to make the show what it is. And I want you to call me out, because I slip up sometimes, and it kills me to be ranting and slip into the current paradigm that we're supposed to be evolving past and say things like our government, or we are doing this in Iraq or Afghanistan, or we've spent this money, or we passed this law. Just send me an email, let me know. If you catch me, I guarantee you I will read your email on air. If you're the first one, and you'll get a free Adam versus the Man t-shirt. If you're the first one and you catch me in a statist slip, let's just call it statist slip, email me, adam@adamversustheman.com. I will gladly correct myself on air and send you a free t-shirt. But anyways, back to Karzai. We know there have been a lot of incidents lately. It's been described as stumbling from crisis to crisis in Afghanistan. But finally, Hamid Karzai has come out and said that the Americans are, quote, demons. This was during a meeting with relatives of the massacre by the American soldier who went on a rampage and killed 16 men, women, and children a couple weeks ago. As he said, quote, "These were satanic acts that will never be forgiven by apologies. The massacre of 16 Afghan children was not the first incident. Indeed, it was the 100th, the 200th, and 500th incident." Now, there's an interesting line here from the New York Times. "Such harsh talk may sound as if it comes from the Taliban, but those are all remarks either made personally by the United States' increasingly hostile ally here," my quote, President Hamid Karzai, or issued by his office in recent days and weeks. Another good quote here. "Let's pray for God to rescue us from these two demons." There are two demons in our country now. I wonder if I guess he's referring to the actual mythological demon of Islam and the United States, the other great Satan. But this is interesting. And I just want to point out what it represents, because it doesn't represent Hamid Karzai having turned over a new leaf, having discovered a certain candor or new honesty. No, Hamid Karzai has always been a political player, a power broker, just like Obama. They all operate the same way. They will do and say whatever it takes to perpetuate their own power. And what this represents is not a change of heart with Karzai himself. What this represents, more importantly, is a change of heart among the Afghan people and a changing of the power calculus that's going on in Karzai's head. So a quote here from, this is the Sir Sherard Cowper-Coles, I guess is how you say his name, the British ambassador to Afghanistan from 2007 through 2009. Quote, "I think this is very serious because Mr. Karzai has always been always had a very ambivalent attitude toward the West and toward the war. He has never really believed Violence is the answer. He is also very conscious and very resentful that his political survival, even perhaps his personal safety, depend on the Americans. Huh. No shit. He never really believed violence is the answer. What kind of puppet have we installed here? There I'm using we deliberately. We have installed a puppet that doesn't believe violence is the answer? How did we screw that up? We installed a puppet who's going to, I don't know, listen to the people he's supposed to lead, maybe occasionally even reflect their true sentiments. Now, Ambassador Crocker is supposed to have an old friendship with Karzai, and he said on this, I think he is a committed Afghan nationalist, that at the end of the day, he seeks the same goals we do. Okay, sorry, I just had to stop there. A committed Afghan nationalist shares the same goals we do. Fuck! Really? If there wasn't better evidence that the American government was completely detached from the will of the people, this is it. We, our representatives allegedly in Afghanistan, the American ambassador appointed by, Bush? Well, whatever, serving under Obama, believes that the American people are somehow also Afghan nationalists? All right. The rest of the quote. And sometimes the rhetoric gets a little heated. Sometimes my rhetoric has been known to get a little bit heated in a few of those meetings. And then I go sit under a tree and think about the larger equities at stake, and we move on. All right. Everybody in government, get heated, go sit under a tree, and when you think about the larger equities at stake, quit your job and move on. All right, we also have a quote, possibly more disturbing, from James Cunningham, the deputy ambassador to Afghanistan. In any relationship, there are things that one party does that the other party doesn't particularly care for, and that goes both ways. The question is not just whether President Karzai is a partner. We're discussing and putting into place a partnership that is going to look forward a decade or so, and that's a partnership with Afghanistan and its leaders, whoever they are. I wonder if that's a veiled threat. How is Karzai going to take that? A partnership with Afghanistan and its leaders, whoever they are. People of Afghanistan, it doesn't matter who you elect or who we appoint to be in charge of you. This partnership of your country getting fucked in the ass every day by an occupying force will continue. The beatings will continue until morale improves. All right, so moving on to the mechanism by which our wars are funded. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke is set up to give a series of 4 public lectures at George Washington University. Gave the first one here on Tuesday and took aim at proponents of the gold standard. Here's the quote. Since the gold standard determines the money supply, there is not much scope for the central bank to use monetary policy to stabilize the economy. Under a gold standard, typically the money supply goes up and interest rates go down in a period of strong economic activity. So that's the reverse of what a central bank would normally do today. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering and catching my words at some point. I've got an earpiece monitor in here, and I know it's my first episode, so bear with me. I'm still getting used to hearing the voice there. It's got a slight lag, so it's not the same as when I was doing radio. But anyways, this is interesting. Bernanke, the headline is Bernanke says gold standard wouldn't solve problems. That's true. The problems are so bad that you're right. He's right. The gold standard wouldn't solve the economic problems we're in. And what's interesting here is he's kind of throwing out a red herring. And this is really interesting or important to note that when people say we advocate for sound money, we advocate for the gold standard, Austrian economists want free market money, they want competing currencies. We're not actually arguing for the gold standard in the sense that Bernanke is talking about. He's turned it into a straw man argument to say that Anybody who is a critic of the Fed, anybody who wants an alternative money system is calling us back to the archaic gold standard. And that's not true. I mean, think about it. In today's world of technology and what we're capable of, if we had competing currencies, certainly they would not be prone to manipulation by a central bank. You would not have inflation. You would not use a currency that comes with the added inflation tax of constantly losing value because someone is printing more dollars and printing now with the flick of a switch, digitally, electronically, yada, yada, yada. The point is, we're not advocating government money backed by gold issued by the government, this gold standard that's being thrown about. That might be a transition, but what we're advocating for is freedom. What we're advocating for is competing currencies. What we're arguing for is allowing the people to determine what the medium of exchange they're going to use is going to be, not a central bank. By the way, the central bank has been getting a lot of criticism lately from those who accept its existence as necessary, simply because it's held overnight interest rates near zero since late 2008 and has bought $2.3 trillion in bonds. And, of course, this is paving the way for future inflation. That's the common understanding of inflation. This is, by definition, the inflation itself. The price increases and the devaluation of the dollar that are the inevitable consequences are going to be coming. So it's not that this is paving the way for future inflation. It's that this is inflation. That inflation is the modus operandi of the central bank. And it's just the consequences of that inflation, the higher prices, the weakened dollar, the suffering economy that come later. But we're seeing that now. Unemployment officially 8% really closer to 25%. And here's the justification from history that Bernanke uses. The one thing people don't appreciate, I think, is that central banking is not a new development. It's been around for a very long time, he said, citing the creation of the Swedish central bank in the 17th century. Yes, one of the things I don't think people appreciate is that murder has been going on for a long time. I mean, it's really an old institution, and we shouldn't do anything to really threaten its continuation. It's just always been that way. I mean, that's the argument here. But here's the worst insult. The arrogance of Bernanke, who, by the way, oh man, I got to share this little aside story. I shop at Whole Foods, and it's a libertarian-owned business. John Mackey, I screwed that up once before. John Mackey, great libertarian advocate, CEO of Whole Foods, and they carry the Atlantic magazine. And as I was checking out just a couple of days ago, I saw the cover of the Atlantic magazine, big cover of Ben Bernanke with the title, The Hero. You gotta be fucking kidding me. All right, here's the insult. Final quote from Ben Bernanke, and we're moving on to more cheerier topics like the IRS. You need to be attentive to where the economy is and not move too quickly to reverse the policies that are helping the recovery. Right. Okay. So, to the IRS story. In Florida, there's been a rash of tax return fraud. They actually have a name for it. They're calling it TurboTax. And the reason is it's just so easy to get the information, social security numbers, addresses, incomes that you need to get a tax return, that now you have high school students getting arrested with piles of social security numbers in their backpacks, with debit cards with tens of thousands of dollars on them. And I mean, I love this story. I think it's great. In Florida, the police are complaining that every 1 in 3 traffic stops, they find evidence of TurboTax fraud. The lesson here is very important. If the government owes you money, don't wait to ask for it. If you have to file your I'm going to be filing my return later today. Believe it or not, I had a report a certain amount of income this past year. I'm ashamed to say being in this business requires some compromises. If you want an explanation about that, email me. But I got to file my return before somebody takes my social security number and changes my address with the IRS and has the check sent somewhere else. That's what's going on here. The real lesson here is don't give the government your money in the first place. I mean, this is ridiculous. You can't trust the IRS to collect your income tax beyond what you will owe and just keep it safe for you. You can't even have that much faith in the IRS. All right, so we need to move on to get to our main story here. I got a couple quick ones I want to cover. We'll get to the siding story tomorrow. Sodas. This is important. Good news. Good news for healthier Americans. Sort of. From CNBC, drop in soda sales accelerate as healthier options grow. So there's so many problems with this story. First of all, Americans in their general short-sightedness are quick to point out that sodas are the problem, as if it's carbonated drinks, as if it's the carbonation itself that is the problem, that causes the health issues. And of course, we know that's bullshit. It's the corn syrup. It's the sugars. It's the poison of this extracted, government-subsidized corn syrup that is in all of these drinks, whether they're carbonated or not. I mean, if you haven't figured this out yet, I mean, I see libertarians supposedly who understand these issues, who understand what's going on, who drink diet soda and like look at the chemicals in there and go, well, the FDA said it was safe, so it must be okay. Corn syrup, the subsidization of corn, the resulting use of it as an artificial sweetener, you can see it's in 90% of the products in an average supermarket. Just go start looking at the ingredients labels. You'll see corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, some derivative of corn syrup listed as a primary ingredient in almost everything. You have to look at the labels. This is another reason to shop at Whole Foods. Don't want to turn this into a commercial. They are not paying me for this. John Mackey. AdamVersusTheMan.com/invest. All right, so prices are going up, and they're saying this is making drinks more difficult for struggling low-income consumers to afford. But the beverage market grew by 0.9% in 2011, and the pace of growth in relative market share of these carbonated beverages, the dangerous ones, has gone down a little bit. Sales of Dr. Pepper's flagship brand rose 0.5% last year, a good showing, but not nearly as good as Fanta, the 9th largest soda brand, which saw sales volume climb 3%. Fanta's growth was enough to unseat Diet Dr. Pepper from the top 10. And, you know, I have to drink something. I drink, again, Whole Foods, Italian sparkling mineral water. A beverage sure to ensure that your sexuality will be questioned. I even, just to be safe, I add a squirt of lime or lemon juice, depending on how I'm feeling that particular day. But the fastest growing beverage brand was Dasani, a bottled water sold by Coca-Cola. Their volume rose 11%. Now, I drink bottled water, so I kind of embarrassed to point this out, but most of the people drinking bottled water because it's healthier or more convenient than tap water are generally neglecting the disastrous effects of how water is processed and bottled, and the fact that a lot of bottled water in this country, and I don't know about Dasani, I should have looked that up, are actually worse, less clean than tap water in most places. But then, I don't know if I trust the government with the water supply. Interesting, the energy drink sales continue to rise. Sales of carbonated soft drinks would have fallen 1.5% without them. Oh, and Gatorade. The great hypocrisy with Gatorade as the health drink. Also, corn syrup. Gatorade has been growing at a fast clip and topped the 1 billion gallon mark for the first time last year. I love seeing fat people drinking Gatorade. People that never work out, having this fantasy that they're being healthy, that they're being sporting, and not even bothering to read the ingredients label or figure out what's in this. But when I was looking up the story online, one more point here, and then we'll move on to our main story. There was an ad on the side column from American beverage industry or some crap like that, and it lists Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, and Sunny D, and said smaller portions, healthier options. The American beverage industry is responding. And I mean, Sunny D, have you ever, I can't, people still drink this crap. There's this thing called orange juice. It's real, it comes from oranges, it's healthy, it's been consumed for millions of years. No, we're going to improve on it with Sunny D. And Sunny D has this weird, sweet, crazy taste to it. I don't know. I guess it appeals to kids. But Sunny D is to orange juice as a street corner hooker is to the woman that you want to be the mother of your children. I mean, it's this corn syrup laden artificial crap. And people wonder why we have an obesity epidemic in this country. All right, so moving on to our top story. Jesse Benton, yes, the campaign manager for Ron Paul 2012, was involved in 2008. He happens to be Ron's grandson-in-law, married to his granddaughter, Valerie. And this story, for me at least, was prompted by an incredible rant by Scott Horton of Anti-War Radio. And the part of his show where he covers this is about 10 minutes. And, we're not going to have time to get into it today. He goes off on Rand Paul for not living up to the legacy of his father. He goes off on Jesse Benton for being... Well, you're going to get the whole story here on Jesse Benton. It looks like it's going to have to wait till tomorrow. But the culmination of this rant, as I played in the teaser that we released 2 days ago, I hope you caught that. Maybe that's why you're tuning in today. The culmination of this rant was him calling for Jesse Benton to be fired. He said, if you love Ron Paul, it's time to declare war on Jesse Benton. Well, I'm not going to be joining him in that call. I'm not going to be joining him in that war, which I think is a little ironic use of words for someone who is anti-war, to declare war on an individual, even metaphorically. But there's a better answer. There's a libertarian solution to this problem. But first, I want to play the interview with Jesse Benton on MSNBC from just a couple weeks ago, just last week. This really pissed a lot of people off in the movement. Now, I saw this, and I thought, wow, Jesse Benton, grandstanding, the guy with the personal desire to get his face in the news, is again speaking on behalf of Ron Paul on cable. And I'm like, wait a second. Where's Ron? Why is Jesse Benton on cable TV again? Why is a surrogate for Ron Paul, who's not a libertarian, speaking on his behalf? Why is the guy who is single-handedly, well, no, that's not true. He's had a lot of help, screwed up so much for this movement? But anyways, let's go to the story, and we'll do some analysis of his performance.
Let's go now to the GOP race for the presidency. Ron Paul with some new remarks saying he's drawing big crowds, but when it comes to voting, he isn't getting as big of a response. Congressman Paul has locked in only 31 delegates, and the latest Gallup poll has him certainly in fourth place with an 11% rating there in a national race. So what is keeping him in there? Joining me right now, Jesse Benton, campaign chairman for Ron Paul 2012. Jesse, good day to you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Well,
all right, so there's the first problem. You have to understand why the media is interviewing, or why MSNBC here is interviewing Jesse Benton. They know that they couldn't really pull this crap with Ron. But Jesse Benton is a perfect tool. He's a great punching bag. He's not going to challenge the mainstream narrative. And the reason they're having him on is to play into their message, Ron Paul doesn't have a chance. He's ready to negotiate away his strength. They're playing on the screen here in the lower third chyron. Ron Paul has 31 delegates. And then they play the number of delegates for all of the other candidates. And Jesse Benton does nothing to challenge this narrative.
Yeah, look, here's something that's interesting, because we have Ron Paul himself having said that he can't picture himself in the Oval Office. So if that's the case, what then is the mission of his campaign?
Now, this is a question a lot of Ron Paul supporters have been asking, and we're going to answer it. I don't think we're going to get to it today, but I promise you, we will answer that question. Now, here's Jesse's weak response.
The mission is to win, and that was an out of context quote where Dr. Paul was simply saying that, you know, it's not his be-all, end-all dream. He doesn't hit the pillow every night picturing himself measuring the drapes in the Oval Office. That doesn't mean he doesn't think he can win or he should win. But you know, we're having a lot of success here, and we're doing a lot of things under the radar. Yesterday, we won 57% of the delegates up in a convention up in Alaska. We did very, very well in the Iowa county conventions yesterday, and won a really strong percentage of delegates moving on to the state convention. We also won delegates in Wyoming and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we're accumulating delegates. We're pushing forward, and we plan to roll to Tampa with a very, very large contingency of bound delegates, and also a lot of delegates that will be bound to other candidates on the first ballot, but we'll free up for Dr. Paul should we get into a brokered convention.
Well, look, and that's a big should we. And I will say most everyone
That's a big should we, because we in the mainstream media are doing our damnedest to ensure that Romney clinches the nomination.
It's your team with being the most successful in terms of organizational skills and getting, you know, people out there. And so
now, this is interesting. She credits the campaign with organizational skills, with getting people out there. And I just want to say, I can tell you from getting around the movement, from having come out about these issues, I've been contacted off the record by numerous people who have told me about problems with the campaign, about failures of organization. And it's not the campaign that deserves any credit for turning people out, for getting out the vote, for organizing people locally, for getting meetups organized, for any kind of local activism with the campaign. No, it's the grassroots initiative. But that doesn't stop Jesse from taking credit.
Bravo to you for that. But I know you talk about this being a quote that was taken out of context. That said, if there's any sort of a message by Ron Paul himself that he can't see himself in the Oval Office, again, there seems to be some disconnect. I mean, you may get crowds, but what's going to make people go into the polling booth and pull the lever or punch that ballot for somebody who doesn't really envision himself as the President of the United States?
I think it's a very good thing that it's not his dream to take power.
Yeah, that's a fair answer, but I want to go back to a second for this media narrative here. You're popular, you're getting crowds, but they're not translating into votes. Now, the mainstream media narrative here is, well, you're not really that popular, or you've got just this little crazy cult following that doesn't vote and doesn't care about politics. But really, this is a failure of the campaign. And the mainstream media won't say this, because if it's a failure of the campaign, it means that, oh my gosh, freedom is popular, liberty is electable, and Ron Paul could actually be president. Which has a lot of the grassroots wondering, does Ron Paul want to be president? Is he actually running to win? And it's a question I've asked myself numerous times, but we'll come back to that.
That's not why he's running. He wants to be president so he can make real changes, try to save this country, restore our Constitution. He's not doing it for personal ambition, desire for personal power. So I think that's very good. I think it's attractive to people. But you do make a good point. We need to continue to work harder. We need to push very hard to make sure we don't get marginalized by the mainstream media, which is very difficult. And we also need to continue to make the case. A lot of the young people that Dr. Paul wins, he's very, very strong in the young vote, routinely wins the vote of young people 18 to 30. We need to continue to make the case to them that they need to turn out. We need to get them to turn out in greater numbers.
We're going to have a separate conversation about Jesse Benton's effectiveness as a media representative or media coordinator for Ron Paul. But something really interesting I want to share just came to light to me recently. Everybody here knows the movie Bruno, Sacha Baron Cohen. Hilarious. Loved it. And I cringed for the Ron Paul scene. I anxiously awaited that, having heard that it was coming. And I was so embarrassed that someone working for Ron Paul had booked an interview with Bruno. Yeah. Well, it turns out it's the same guy that booked Bob Barr for the interview with, what was the other movie? The other Sacha Baron Cohen movie where Bob Barr gets embarrassed. Borat. Yeah, Borat. Bob Barr eats cheese from the milk of Borat's wife's teat or something. And it turns out that at that time, guess who Jesse Benton was working for? Bob Barr. That's right. And then you have another interview with Sacha Baron Cohen as Bruno for Ron Paul when he's running for president.
It's very critical for people in this age group. This election is now. The debt crisis is at our door. Do we want to take our country back? Do we want to let ourselves drift off and become a second-rate nation?
Okay, so if he doesn't win, what is his best hope? Is he going to try to cut some sort of a deal? I mean, have you had those conversations?
Now, this is the part that's really pissed off a lot of the grassroots.
We haven't had any conversations outside of just a little bit of musing with some other senior staff and Dr. Paul, but
so
there are a lot of different things we could fight for.
Okay, like what?
Sure. Well, obviously our ultimate goal is for Dr. Paul to be the nominee. Short of that, there are various things we could negotiate for. Lots of different platform changes to the GOP, cabinet positions for our supporters, the vice presidency, whole variety of things. But the first and foremost goal is, of course, for Dr. Paul to be the nominee.
And what's the key issue the Paul campaign would like to see lead the debate from there?
All right, well, we don't have even time to play the rest of this interview. Now, I didn't think that was a horrible answer. I don't know. I'll be fair to Jesse Benton. I used to be friends with him. I mean, personally, well, I guess that's going to have to wait. We've only got a couple minutes left in the hour. I didn't think that was such a horrible answer, but apparently after the money bomb, no one but Paul, Scott Horton was prompted by this to rant about the failings of the campaign and point out quite correctly that even if Ron Paul is chosen as the vice presidential running mate, we're not voting for Mitt Romney. It ain't gonna happen. So anyways, that brings us to the end of the hour. Thank you so much for sticking with us so far. And tomorrow, we'll play the rest of this interview. There's a little bit left here. We'll get into the Scott Horton rant. As always, we'll do the headlines. And, you know, the other thing I wanted to do today was play for you one of my recent videos, just a minute long. The Message of Freedom in 1 minute, and respond to some of the great comments from that on YouTube. But whatever, it's coming. Plenty of good material here. Check it out, adamversustheman.com/podcast. If you're not already signed up to get this in your feed one way or another, subscribe, do what you got to do, download the audio, enjoy. But I just want to point out, in closing, that this show is made possible by the support of people like you who care about this independent libertarian propagandist committing random acts of journalism, being able to continue to do my thing. So please, if you're willing to support the show, if you found this value to you, please subscribe. Go to adamversustheman.com/invest. We've got these awesome new t-shirts, hoodies, hats that we're giving away to donors. Of course, as always, we've got these beautiful Adam versus the Man logo QR code stickers. And we used to be giving them away as thank yous for various levels of donations. But we're having a fundraising drive, yes. Notice I didn't call it a bomb or a grenade or any other violent metaphor. But no, obviously doing this podcast is relatively inexpensive. I've got all of my equipment. I point the camera here. I upload it as long as I can keep a roof over my head and the internet flowing and the electricity on. we can do this. But the current subscriber level is only about $600 per month. And I'd like to expand the video production. I'd like to expand this operation, the distribution, and bring the message of liberty more effectively to a greater audience. So if you can help out, $10 monthly subscription gets you a free t-shirt, $20 monthly subscription gets you a hat, and a $30 monthly subscription gets you a hoodie. Unless you can catch me in an event selling merchandise, that's the only way you're going to be able to get any of that cool swag. Thanks so much for tuning in to the first ever Adam versus the Man podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow.